Hello, I'm Jonny Dymond, and this is The Global Story. Inauguration Day in the United States is a ceremony full of tradition, attended by political, business, cultural heavyweights. But behind the scenes, hundreds of junior staffers will be preparing to enter the White House and begin work. Today, we're taking you to the heart of the West Wing to hear what the first few days of a presidency are really like for those settling in at their desks. And as Donald Trump prepares to serve his second term, we'll ask whether he's better prepared this time around. With me is Katie Johnson. She went into the White House in 2009 as President Obama's personal assistant. Hi there, Katie.
Nice to see you.
Inauguration Day, I guess, is two different days. There's the day that tens of millions of people see, the speeches and the oaths and the parade and the rest of it. And then there is the day that you took part in, where White House staff kind of rush into the building and start their jobs. Just what is it like?
You know, my inauguration day in 2009 was an experience unlike any other. I'd come off the campaign. I'd been one of the first employees hired on the Obama campaign. So I'd been everything in my life for 2 years. And then I moved from Chicago to Washington and kind of urgently prepared for this new role to be the special assistant to the president and kind of control his day-to-day life. So on Inauguration Day, which, you know, in 2009 was freezing, that's my vivid memory of it. But everyone else was going to inauguration. Everyone else was clamoring over what tickets they had and, you know, where they were sitting and how they were getting there and transportation. But I was obsessed with how I was going to be at the White House by 11:55 a.m. to make sure I was through the doors at noon, which is when the president is sworn in, because I had no idea what I was walking into, really. I lived about a mile away, and I walked through all the crowds to the entrance to the White House. It was kind of my second time ever entering the building. And I went through security, which as always is challenging, getting through the White House security, and entered into what's called the executive office building. It's like any other job, right? They give you a badge. They tell you where your office is, and they literally hand you a box of office supplies. So I was handed a box of highlighters and notepads and Post-its. And then there's someone who walks you to your office. And I sat in what's called the outer oval, which is the office directly outside the Oval Office. And I sat there, and the second I arrived, I would say within 2 minutes of sitting down at my desk, about 10 people showed up to try to show me how to use the phones, because the phones are incredibly complicated, or at least this is now dating myself. This is 2009, so it's a while ago. But there were 4 different phone systems that I had to be able to tackle by the time the president arrived at the White House that evening. So it was a totally surreal experience.
I love that the first thing you had to be shown was the phone system, so complicated it was then. Do you remember how you felt as you sat down at your desk and you looked around?
I think I felt an awe. I recall, the chief of staff when I first started was a Rahm Emanuel, who's currently the ambassador to Japan. And he was a former congressman at the time and someone who I had previously worked for, so I knew him very well. But he gave a speech to the interns every year where he said that if you ever don't feel awe when you walk through the gates of the White House, it's probably time to turn your badge in. And I felt that every single day.
Was there a sense of camaraderie at a new start? And was there a sense of a kind of beginning of a new school term?
Yeah, that's actually a very good way of describing it. We had, at least for those of us, and I would consider myself junior staff at the time, much younger than I am now. And it was a lot of us who'd come off the campaign, who'd become very close and very good friends. And we're really excited with the opportunity about what we were going to be able to do in government. I remember when the Affordable Care Act passed, which was a long slog during the early part of the administration, the president said, this is the most important thing that's happened. Winning the election was amazing and was incredibly special, but being able to actually do what you said you were going to do during the election was the real victory.
How abrupt is the shift from one team, the outgoing team, and another, the incoming team? I mean, did you have communications with the people who were leaving as you came in?
Each nominee for a major party sets up a transition team that's entirely separate from the campaign, and it exists prior to either side knowing who won. And then after someone wins the presidency in November, there is a protocol and laws in place that kind of govern how those communications and work goes, from kind of transferring information from the existing to the incoming administration. But, from my experience as an incoming administration in 2009, we were coming in after the Bush team, and they were unbelievably gracious. I remember meeting with my counterpart, who'd had my job previously under Bush, and she, cleared me into the West Wing. She showed me around. She explained to me how her role was, and she was very clear that, a lot of these jobs fluctuate hugely depending on who the president is, right? President Bush was an incredibly early riser. So they started their day, I think, at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. But he ended his day pretty early, comparatively. President Obama preferred to do a lot of reading and work in the residence in the morning and started a little later. So you kind of have to adjust to the cadence of the principal and what works for them, and what makes them be able to execute at their highest possible level.
We've been talking about moving in. You also moved out, didn't you? Because you went to the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, in President Obama's second term. And so you experienced leaving an administration as well as starting right at the beginning. How was that?
Every political appointee is given what they call an off-boarding date. And so depending on what your role is, what you're covering, what they consider the necessity of having you stay there until the last possible second, you're given an offboarding date. I was doing regulatory work at the time, so we were finalizing regulations up until kind of the last minute. So my offboarding date was January 19th at 5 p.m., which is about the last possible moment you can leave.
Yeah.
And it was an entirely surreal feeling. It's the same process as inboarding, but just in reverse. You go back to that same room in the EEOB. They read you out of a security clearance. You hand in your badge so you can no longer get access to the White House complex. And you walk out the Northwest gates and you can't get back in.
How did it feel? I mean, it must have been pretty intense few years. And then all of a sudden it's over.
Yeah, it just ends. It felt, I think obviously the election for those of us who were working in the Obama White House at the time was not either how we anticipated or how we hoped it had worked out. And so there had been an expectation that a lot of the work we were doing was going to continue under a Clinton administration. And we were kind of working with that expectation.
And I love you all, too. Last night, I congratulated Donald Trump and offered to work with him on behalf of our country. I hope that he will be a successful president for all Americans.
I don't think any of us really expected to stay on. I wasn't expecting to stay on in my role in a Clinton administration. I always knew I was going to be leaving. You kind of had felt like you were leaving something on the table for somebody to kind of pick up the baton and continue. So it was certainly sad. I remember my last day, one of the women I'd worked with for a very long time, we kind of went around and, took pictures everywhere. I worked at the time at OMB, and every OMB director and every OIRA administrator signs their desk. And so we watched my boss then do that. You kind of leave it's a tradition to leave a note for the people that are coming in to take your roles. So we did that. And just, it feels very much like an ending. It's, I've subsequently gone into the private sector, and I am now an attorney at a law firm. And it's very interesting, right? My job doesn't end. And every job I'd had up until then, it's some date certain it's going to end. And there's a finality to it that is a little, I would say, disarming.
Katie, a huge pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for giving us your time and your experience.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Well, we've heard the view from inside the Obama administration. Let's fast forward to the present. I'm joined by Courtney Subramanian, a former White House correspondent, now a senior news editor here at the BBC. Hey, Courtney, how are you?
Hi, Johnny. I'm great. How are you?
I'm just grand. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you with us. I want to talk about then and now. Let's start with then, and that's the first term of the Trump presidency, when perhaps he and his team were caught by surprise by winning the election, and the transition was seen as perhaps not as smooth as it might have been. There were things that people thought went wrong, weren't there, in those early days?
I mean, he didn't even have, an acceptance speech prepared on election night. I think that element of surprise really sort of hamstrung them from the beginning. And that first week was evidence of that. I think there was a lot going on. He was signing a flurry of executive orders. He hadn't appointed key positions. I think he had 25 of thousands of government appointments named by the time he was sworn into office on that first day. And in that first week, we saw a visit by the British Prime Minister. We saw the Mexican president cancel a trip because they were angered by Trump's executive order on the border, which had said that the U.S. government would front the bill for building, more border wall, but that Mexico would pay it back without any sort of explanation. And then, of course, there was the Muslim ban, which had caused a lot of chaos at the airports because it was unclear if, visa holders and green card holders were going to get caught up in this, and that, of course, immediately was taken to the courts. So I think overall, I mean, just from the get-go, this was an administration that was completely in over their head.
And we also saw, as the weeks went on, pretty high staff turnover. I mean, even as positions were being filled, people were leaving at the same time.
Yes, I mean, that was the thing. I think particularly will be a huge difference this time around. He has people around him who understand the institutions in Washington, which, that element of surprise is gone, right? So one thing they've made very clear is they want to make sure that they are prepared both with policy and strategy, but also with staffing. And so we've seen him, name key important cabinet appointments at a faster clip. I think he's already named more than 50 people. But also, some of those lower level positions as well. He's installing a lot of loyalists. He's conducted a lot of these interviews himself. And that was something that was a key missing component during those first initial months. And honestly, into the second half of his presidency, he continued to leave positions unfilled, which I think ultimately was a huge hurdle for them.
Do you have a sense of coherence, that there is a kind of ideological coherence in the appointments that he has already made and in the policy priorities that have been made clear?
I think the only coherence this time round is that he's really focused on loyalty, right? Which is something that we've learned through the first Trump presidency and into this one is key to him, right? He has a mix of different appointees. We have, Robert F. Kennedy, who is a controversial figure for health secretary, but who's somebody who believes in abortion rights. And that sort of contradicts the party's stance on women's reproductive rights. You have folks like Kash Patel for FBI director, Russ Vought for budget director, Elon Musk, who's not an appointee, but who is an influential figure in this administration, who, want to take a sledgehammer to bureaucracy, which seems to be another sort of theme of a second Trump presidency.
The chief of staff role is often seen as pivotal. It's a woman called Susie Wiles this time round, and there seems to be even more focus on her and her position and what it will mean for the years to come.
I think it's undisputed that Susie Wiles is the power center in this administration, in Trump's inner circle. She has been with the president-elect since his post-January 6th exile. She formerly worked for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. She's a longtime Florida operative, but she has had a massive role in shaping both how Trump is, his rhetoric in terms of what he's talking about, what he was talking about on the campaign, how he was talking about it. He didn't really want to talk about the economy. She really pushed him to talk about the economy. But she also is somebody who holds the keys. And I think everyone agrees that she'll be the one who is, setting the tone and messaging other than Trump, but also has a handle on who's getting hired, who's in what roles, who's staying in what roles, right? Which is something we should expect a lot more turnover, as we did see in the first administration.
Is it your feeling that this is a much better prepared administration than last time around?
I do say it is a much more confident administration than the first time round. I think they feel like they know how the government works a bit better. They're more prepared in terms of strategy, legal strategy, in terms of staffing. They are very keen to get some of these big campaign promises off the ground right away. I think you'll still see that element of chaos, of course, because that's something that follows Donald Trump in and out of office. But I think that you'll find a much more confident staff around him, and that will play an important part.
Whatever happens is going to be interesting. Courtney, thank you so much for your time. It's great to talk to you.
Great to speak with you. Thanks, Jonny.
If you want more episodes of The Global Story, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Each day we do a deep dive into a single international story. So subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you want to, leave us a comment below. Thanks so much.